Hola a todos, les damos la bienvenida desde Fundación Barqui. Les agradecemos mucho por acompañarnos en este nuevo espacio y le damos la bienvenida especialmente a Saku Tuominen, que nos va a acompañar hoy. Welcome, Saku. You will hear the translation, but I want to say welcome and thank you for being with us today. We really appreciate your time and generosity. Contamos con Saku y vamos a contar con traducción en vivo para nuestro encuentro, con lo cual yo voy a hacer las preguntas en español y Saku nos va a contestar en inglés y el equipo nos va a ir traduciendo. Antes de presentar a Saku, quería darle la bienvenida a este nuevo ciclo que desde Fundación Barqui pensamos en crear un encuentro, un ciclo de encuentros para hacer 20 entrevistas.
I'm listening okay, everything is perfect.
Good. De este ciclo, como les decía, van a ser 20 entrevistas en el 2021, para entender y para poder construir juntos el futuro de la educación. Creemos que para construir ese futuro de la educación es fundamental el diálogo, es fundamental escucharnos y también reflexionar, hacer una pausa en los trajines del día para pensar y mirar a largo plazo. Con lo cual queremos que este ciclo de entrevistas sea una oportunidad para eso, para escuchar la visión de otros y también pensar la propia práctica y lo que cada uno está haciendo y cómo lo puede hacer mejor en el futuro. Y cómo aportarle a nuestras tareas una mirada de largo plazo. Que lo que hacemos no responda solo al hoy, sino que responda a las necesidades de los próximos años. Con esta bienvenida y agradeciendo a todos que nos acompañen en este espacio 2021, invitándolos a que participen activamente, que nos dejen preguntas en el chat y que podamos de verdad tener una charla entre todos. Presento al invitado de hoy, como les decía, Saku. Saku es el fundador de 100, así como estuvimos en contacto y estuvimos trabajando juntos, pero Saku, además de haber fundado 100, tiene una larga trayectoria y por eso lo elegimos como el primer invitado del ciclo. Saku escribió más de 15 libros, de lo cual algo nos va a contar hoy. Es profesor en la Universidad Alto de Helsinki, pero además es productor de aceite de oliva, es jugador de hockey sobre hielo, es un emprendedor de Finlandia y tiene mucho más para compartirnos en este encuentro de hoy. Bienvenido, Saku, y muchas gracias por estar acá.
Thank you, Agustín. Thanks so much for the invitation. It's such a pleasure to be joining to such a meaningful enterprise, discussing about the future of education. I couldn't think of anything more meaningful. So happy to be here, proud.
Excelente. Antes de preguntarte sobre tu próximo libro, quiero preguntarte por qué 100, por qué fundaron 100 y cuál es, para los que no conocen 100, cuál es la mirada de largo plazo que tienen en 100.
Okay, so what 100 is doing is that we are a global education nonprofit. And what we are trying to do is that we try to identify impactful and scalable education innovations, and then we help them spread. So there's a lot of people are complaining that the change is not happening in education, but that's not the case because there's a lot of beautiful things happening in classrooms all over the world. But the challenge is that no one knows about them. So what we try to do is that we try to give them the visibility they deserve, and we try to work hard in order to make them spread. And before I explain you kind of like the thinking behind, maybe I let you to translate.
No,
it's happening at the same time. Cool. Okay, yeah. So why did we decide to find 100 is that I'm an idealist, which means that my passion in life is trying to make the change happen. And if you really want to make a change happen in the world, I think that there is no better place to start than in education. Because if we are thinking about the world we are living in at the moment, and if we are thinking about the world in 2030 and so on, I think that we really need to create a new kind of education in order to help our kids flourish in an uncertain world. And that's exactly what we try to do. So we try to identify impactful innovations, and then we help them spread. And we are operating in all continents. We have studied more than 5,000 innovations in 130 countries. We have ambassadors in over 100 countries, and we are working together with the likes of World Bank, OECD, Brookings Institute, Lego Foundation, and so on. So that's what we do.
Excelente, muy interesante. Y la pregunta natural, pero la vamos a dejar para dentro de un rato, es ¿qué han encontrado como lo más impactante en educación y cuáles son esos cambios más urgentes? Pero antes de ir a los desafíos actuales y una mirada de largo plazo, quiero preguntarte por tu próximo libro, que tiene un nombre que no puedo pronunciar en español, pero es Koulukirja. Me vas a ayudar a pronunciarlo bien. Y el libro dice, ¿por qué cambiar las escuelas en el mundo es de lo más difícil y de lo más importante? ¿De qué se trata este libro?
Actually, my following book is going to be about trees, meaning how trees grow and what can we learn from that. So that's going to be the next one. And the previous one was school book, Koulukirja. And the essence of that book is that whenever we are discussing about making change happen in education, when you go, for example, to education events, there's a lot of discussion about why schools need to change. And quite often the reason is that schools are based on an industrial model and we need to be teaching new kind of skills and so on. But I think that the main challenge is that practically everyone agrees on this one. There's no big disagreement on this topic. But what is the main challenge is that how do you make the change happen in practice? So I think that we should be concentrating more on implementation of this change, and implementation in a sense that no one is left behind. So how do you make the change happen fast enough, providing both excellence and equity in every continent? And I think that that is the real challenge. So I think that the world is full of beautiful solutions that could help us to make the change happen. But it's the implementation that is the most difficult part, definitely.
Estoy muy de acuerdo. Y la pregunta es, está claro que tenemos acuerdos globales muy grandes de por dónde tiene que ir la mejora, esta escuela que tiene que modernizarse, tiene que responder a los desafíos de hoy. Antes de preguntarte por la implementación, ¿cuáles son para vos 3 o 4 acuerdos sobre los cuales hay que cambiar? Antes de preguntarte cómo, te pregunto cuáles son esos 3 campos de acción. ¿Es en la escuela, en la formación docente, en la regulación de las escuelas, en la forma de enseñar, en el contenido? ¿Qué priorizaría de todo eso?
Well, it's a really good question, because I think that there is no one truth, because every country and every continent is so different. For example, if I'm thinking about the Finnish model, everything is based on trust, meaning is that we try to really educate the teachers, we give them a lot of freedom and we trust them. And they are actually making huge amount of assessment in the classroom. There is no standardized testing and so on. It's done by the teachers. And I think that in theory, that is a beautiful model. But if you take that kind of thinking, for example, to sub-Saharan Africa, where there's an urgent need for more than 30 million teachers, then you cannot sort of like use that one and so on. So if you think about the challenges happening in Africa, in India, in Silicon Valley, in Spain, or in Finland, I think that you have to always be mindful about the context. But I would say is that whenever we are talking about making change happen in education, we should always start with one fundamental question, which means, what is the purpose of education? And for me, the purpose of education is to make each and every child flourish in life, no matter what happens. And if we move towards extremely uncertain world, where this kind of pandemic might happen again, we have the climate warming, climate change, which might create other solutions, challenges. Then we have the artificial intelligence and so on and so on. Then I think that in order to make kids truly flourish in 2030s, you need to have You need to be able to cope with uncertainty. You need to have some sort of growth mindset. You need to have resilience. You need to have empathy and so forth. And the problem is that most of these skills have not traditionally been taught in schools, because we've been so much about memorizing things and so on. And so much of the education system at the moment is based on assessment. And I think one of the big challenges is that practically all of these new skills are extremely complicated to assess. So not only do we have to change the content, but maybe we have to change the whole thinking behind the schools and so on. And I think that is really complicated, because, for example, if you say that let's take away part of the assessment from the schools, then I would say that a lot of people in the media, a lot of parents and so on, they will be really suspicious, saying is that this is not the school I know. And my answer is that, well, the world is not either the world you know. But if you think about the challenges in education, one challenge is, for example, is that quite often a successful education system, ecosystem, is measured by PISA. So country is successful in PISA, and that means that the education is a good one. And in theory, that is the case. But in many countries which have been successful in PISA, there's been huge amount of mental challenges, meaning is that kids are having anxiety, they are even feeling burnout, they are not having vacations, they are studying to the test and so on. So if the kids are successful in PISA, but there's no holistic well-being, my feeling is that that's not the education system that I want to see happening and so on. So I think that there's a lot of challenges on how to make this happen and so on and so on. Also, in order to kind of like increase the complexity, is the exams to the university, meaning is that if the exams for the university are based on standardized testing, then how do you prevent that gap will become way too wide and so on. So for example, what is happening in many countries, what we are seeing at the moment at 100, is that early childhood and primary education can actually be quite creative and quite flexible. But closer you get to the exams of the university, the more traditional it gets. And that's also a complicated thing.
Sí, muy interesante. Se desprenden muchas preguntas y también muchos desafíos. Yo me encuentro en Argentina, donde en PISA no estamos donde queremos, entonces nuestro primer desafío es mejorar ahí. Y después todos los demás, pero creo que escucharte nos hace pensar que esos cambios tienen que ir de la mano, que no podemos pensar en alcanzar el estándar de PISA esperado y después sumarle creatividad a nuestra escuela. Tenemos que hacer todo junto y es una mejora permanente y constante. Pero muy interesante la reflexión y esto de lo holístico en la educación. Déjame preguntarte de la experiencia que tienen ustedes, que han visto modelos de alto impacto y de mucha innovación en todo el mundo. Déjame irnos a la pregunta de la implementación, que estamos de acuerdo que sería fácil acordar las 10 prioridades, es muy difícil implementarlas. Hace años que tenemos claro algunas mejoras y no terminan de suceder. ¿Cuáles son, no te voy a preguntar las barreras, pero cuáles son las claves para implementar? ¿Cuáles son tus consejos para un gobierno o una escuela que quiere implementar determinados cambios? ¿Qué tienen que tener en cuenta para que esos cambios sucedan de verdad?
Well, that is a $1 million question, and unfortunately, I have to disappoint you. I don't have an easy answer. But I also think is that there's a great term when we are discussing about making change happen in education, and the term is solutionist, which means that quite often people who is sort of like an outsider to the education ecosystem comes outside and has a fast solution, meaning is that let's change everything immediately. And the problem is that quite often that does not work, because education is a really complex ecosystem and so on and so on. So whenever you have to when you want to make the change happen in education, I think that you need to be ambitious, meaning is that you need to have ambition, but you need to be humble, and you need to understand is that this will take a lot of time, and it's not a bad thing. Then secondly, I would say is that it cannot happen, if the change happens only bottom up, it's complicated because it's going to be way too slow, and it's complicated to manage that one. But if it's happening only top down, then the problem is that you are losing all the teachers and so on. So I think that first of all, we all need to understand is that we need to improve education, and it's going to take time, and most likely we will make mistakes, meaning is that not everything works. Then you have to understand is that everyone hates change. I hate change, you hate change, teachers hate change, and so on. So you have to sympathize with them. So if you're sort of like top down, if you're deciding something and without listening to teachers, you're trying to force changes to the classrooms, then the problem is that teachers will be burnt out and so on. And if you are losing teachers, then it's going to be really complicated to make the change happen. So I would say is that, first of all, you have to agree on the direction, meaning is that this is what I would love the schools to look like. Then you should explain why is this change needed, because not everyone understands. And so you should kind of like understand is that these are the main reasons behind this kind of thinking. And then you should create some sort of organization that is identifying the challenges, the problems, questions from teachers, and is sort of like trying to improve the schools in cooperation together with the teachers. And accept is that it might be 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and not everything works, and so on and so on. But the problem is that because so much of the education is political, then you have the elections, then you have someone who wants to make the change happen fast, then you might have one billionaire who wants to fix schools and wants to do it in 1 year, then you have parents who are complaining, then you have the media, and so on. So it's really complicated to be calm-minded, have long-term thinking, have patience, listen everyone, and to make the change happen, and so on and so on. And the problem is that quite often we, for example, complain that teachers are against the change. And actually quite often they have a good reason to be against the change, because no one has been listening to them, and so on. So it's not black and white and so on. So agree on the direction, do it in dialogue with the teachers, accept that it will not be fast, accept that you have to make modifications, and have enough resources to make the change happen. And when I'm talking about resources, part of that is monetary, financial, meaning is that there's enough money, enough equipment, and so on and so on. But part of that should also be time. And I think one of the challenges in education is that many of the teachers, someone outside comes and says to teachers is that you have to start teaching in a totally different way, but unfortunately we don't have any time to educate you. And it's a complicated position to be standing in front of the classroom, someone demanding something from you and not giving kind of like new education and so on. So it's a complicated one.
Muy buena la respuesta. Estamos muy de acuerdo en la centralidad de los docentes. Desde Fundación Barqui trabajamos para celebrar la profesión docente, para reconocer su labor y también para fortalecer, para acompañar, para permitir a los docentes mejorar diariamente en esa tarea tan primordial. Nos parece muy importante escuchar a los docentes. Hoy en Argentina estamos viviendo un tiempo muy crítico, de una discusión muy tensa entre si abrir las escuelas o no por la pandemia, y nos parece que todavía no se está escuchando a los docentes lo suficiente. Es una discusión política, es una discusión mediática, pero queremos alzar más la voz de los docentes porque son ellos los que conocen la realidad de los chicos y saben lo que es mejor para ellos. Entonces ahí compartimos esta visión de escucharlos. Tengo 2 preguntas acá que se me pisan una con otra, porque cada respuesta tuya abre a nuevos interrogantes. Primero, en este acuerdo de acordar las direcciones, ¿te parece que el cambio en educación requiere de varios actores? Dijiste muy bien, hay gente que viene afuera con una solución mágica, que no es tal o que no es tan rápida como se piensa. Ahora, el cambio en educación requiere de esa coalición donde actores como vos, que no venían del mundo de la educación, participen, o organismos multilaterales con las escuelas, con los gobiernos y con la sociedad civil. ¿Hace falta de un acuerdo global o es solo tarea de la escuela?
Well, again, this is so frustrating in a way because there is no easy answer. But I start with one thing. It's kind of like a side note, but I think that it's a really important side note. I think that we need to change the tone, change the language we are using in education at the moment. We are saying is that schools are old-fashioned, schools need to change and so on. And I totally understand is that if you are a teacher and someone says is that you are old-fashioned, you need to change. If I would be a teacher, I would say is that shut up and so on, come and teach and so on. So I think that instead of saying that you need to change, I'd say that we all understand that this is a challenge, let's improve together. So we should change the whole tone immediately. But then making the change happen, first of all, I think that in many countries, it's not that dramatic. Schools, there's a lot of room for improvement, but at the same time, schools have been raising a lot of kids from poverty and so on. So it's not black and white. It's not all bad. Actually, there's actually a lot of good things happening at the moment and so on. So when people say that we need to explode education immediately, then my question is that what does it mean in practice? Do you explode the classroom and so on? And it doesn't happen like that. So I think that most likely the change will happen actually quite slow. And it's okay because coming up with one global kind of like team of people who will decide like a card is that this is what the education will look like, I don't believe in that at all. I think that every country will have their own strategy and so on. But what I do believe, and this is opening up a totally different kind of topic and world, is that I think that there will be models which will challenge the whole education system in many countries. And I think that it's not impossible that the change will start from countries which are in crisis. Like, let's take, for example, Africa. If I'm thinking about the models on how to organize education in 2030s, I think that they don't come from a country like Finland because the urgency to change is not that bad. It's really complicated to make a radical change because we have too much to lose in Finland. But if you take the sub-Saharan Africa, which is where the whole education ecosystem is in massive crisis, I think that they are much more open for trying something totally new, which might be a combination of teachers and digital platform and personalized learning using AI and so on and so on. And I don't see it at all impossible that global north will continue improving incrementally, but the whole thinking will be challenged by bold innovations coming from countries where the challenges are more complicated. And I don't know whether that's a good thing or bad thing, and maybe it's not black and white and so on, but I don't see global north, like countries like Finland, making a dramatic change in education because of the basic nature of education ecosystem.
Es muy interesante para nosotros escucharlo, Saku, porque solemos mirar a Finlandia como el lugar de las soluciones. Seguro tenemos mucho para copiar y para aprender, pero también entender que no todas las soluciones son exportables y esto que hay mucho de contexto. Y también ver que ustedes tienen desafíos nos alienta a decir, bueno, acá hay otros, vamos a a lograr superar esos desafíos, pero todos tenemos con qué lidiar. Te quiero hacer una pregunta personal, porque sos un emprendedor, trabajás en industrias muy distintas y tenés un poco en educación, pero también en la producción, y vos lo dijiste al principio, sos un idealista. En tu carrera personal debe haber habido más de algún docente que te marcó la carrera, la vocación, el emprendedurismo. ¿Quién fue ese maestro? Si nos podés contar alguna anécdota o algo de un maestro, y por qué un maestro te inspiró a ser lo que sos hoy.
I'm happy to. I make a brief comment before I go there about the Finnish education system. I think that whenever people are praising Finnish system, you have to understand is that how the Finnish system works is that we are having relatively short school days, we have long breaks, we have long vacations, we have small amount of homework and so on and so on. So it's kind of like quite relaxed model. And if I would be taking the Finnish model and I would take it, for example, move it to Mexico City, for example, I think that it would be a disaster. So I think that so much of the success of Finnish system is related to the Finnish society in general. And which means that we don't really have poverty and so on and so on. So I think that that's something which you have to keep in mind. But if I'm going back to teachers, I would talk not only about teachers. I've been playing ice hockey, for example, all my life. So if I'm taking the ice hockey coaches or the teachers that I still remember, I think that none of them was about being extremely tough or having huge amount of assessment and so on and so on. It was more about trust. It was more about growth mindset and so on. So whenever there was a teacher, when I had a feeling is that they trust me, they know that I can improve. And they were saying like, almost like hint saying is that Agustín, I think that you can do a little bit better or whatever. Then you kind of like start to grow and so on and so on. So I think that the essence of a great teacher, great education ecosystem, great family is that you have like a growth mindset or I'm calling it practical hope. And what do I mean by practical hope is that it doesn't mean that my future is without problems, because we all will have challenges. But practical hope means is that no matter what happens, I can cope, I can come up with the solutions. And I think that the teachers I still love have been able to give kind of like me the self-confidence that no matter what happens, I can cope. I have the self-efficacy in there. And I was listening to one panel of teachers in one education event. And there was one teacher who said something really beautiful. There was first teacher who said is that the most important rule or the goal of any teacher is to inspire kids. And I thought that interesting, beautiful, great, I agree. And then the second one said is that actually no, the most important thing is to be inspired by kids. So each and every teacher who I still vividly remember and love was a teacher who was inspired by the kids, which means that there was a genuine dialogue, there was genuine listening, genuine care, and it didn't come top down. It came from the side and so on. So I'd say that it's all about, I think that for teachers and for leaders, it's the same. The most important thing is to help people grow.
Muy bueno, tomamos nota de inspirar a los chicos y de dejarnos inspirar por los chicos. Y creo que es algo en el que estamos siempre en movimiento, no hay forma de quedarse quieto. Muy interesante la idea. Déjame, no puedo evitar, mencionaste 2 veces el tema de la confianza. Hablaste de que en Finlandia confían en los maestros y les dejan hacer su trabajo y no se enfoca tanto en los assessments, en las evaluaciones generales, sino que se enfoca en lo que cada uno de ellos hace. Y cuando hablabas de los docentes y el docente que te inspiró, volviste a hablar de confianza, de trust. Así que la pregunta es, porque entendemos que el sistema educativo necesita de confianza. ¿cómo se genera esa confianza? ¿Cuáles son las oportunidades para fortalecer esa confianza?
If I'm gonna be quite radical, I would say is that one of the biggest challenges in education ecosystems all over the world is the lack of trust. I would say that the whole of the system is based on not trusting. The government don't trust principals. Principals don't trust teachers. Parents don't trust teachers. And then we don't trust the kids, which means that you are testing the schools, you are testing the teachers, you are testing the kids, and so on and so on. And I think that that's the way the whole system has been built. But we all know that as human beings, if you are tested all the time, you have the feeling is that you sort of like start to diminish at one point. And I think that if you don't have trust embedded in the education ecosystem, then it's really complicated to grow. And quite often when we are, for example, discussing about education innovations, quite often someone asks is that, how do we know that this works? How do we know, do we have the data in order to guarantee that this education innovation works? But the problem is that if you go outside of the school into a world that is changing really fast, no one knows what works. We don't know what kind of innovations work in 2030 and so on. That's why you have to try, and then you have to analyze, then you have to make modifications, and then you have to try again. And we are sort of like complaining that the education at the moment is not working as well as it should be. But then when we are trying to change, we are saying is that, yes, but we don't know whether the change will work and so on. And I'm quite often asking is that, first of all, what do we have to lose? Because if we are not extremely happy with the system at the moment, then I think that we need to change something or try something and so on. But more importantly, how do we know that kids are not learning from things that did not work? And I quite like, for example, there's a concept, and it might be difficult to scale, but as a thinking exercise, there's a school called Khan Lab Academy at the bottom of the Khan Academy, the Khan Lab School. And what they are trying to say, what they are saying to parents is that we give a guarantee that nothing we do in the school works, because the whole education is about experiments and then analyzing, learning, and improving. And one could say is that, okay, that is possible in Silicon Valley because everyone are having the growth mindset and so on. But still, I would encourage every education system, try some new things and accept that not all of them work, because also doing something that does not work, that can be actually an extremely valuable thinking exercise or learning exercise for parents, for teachers, and for kids, and so on. And one more thing is that whenever we are saying is that one of the key skills one should be teaching in school is, for example, how to cope with uncertainty and how to have resilience. The problem is that if parents are not good at coping with uncertainty, and if teachers are not good at coping with uncertainty, it's really complicated to sort of like make kids believe is that actually they can be, because we all know that kids are learning huge amount of from the examples that parents or teachers are giving them.
Estamos muy de acuerdo, y esta definición de la desconfianza que hacías al principio nos queda clara, y es un desafío en el que estamos trabajando y queremos seguir trabajando porque nos parece fundamental recuperar esa confianza. Los invito a hacer preguntas en el chat, tengo algunas para leer, quiero hacer las últimas dos que yo había preparado para Saku y después levantar más del público. Saku, trabajaste y creaste una productora de televisión, trabajaste por 20 años en la televisión, conocés ese mundo, conocés lo que a la gente le interesa y cómo se produce la televisión para esos intereses. La educación es un tema que nos interesa, es un tema del cual hay una demanda social que permita hacer cosas de educación en la televisión, o no lo es y tenemos que hacer algo para que la educación esté ahí.
I think that there is a genuine interest, and it's difficult to find, for example, a CEO or media person who doesn't have some kind of interest towards improving education and so on, because many of us have kids, and so it's understandable, and you should have interest. But I think that the main challenge is that people don't understand is that making change happen is really complicated. So there's a lot of great people working in the field of education, and they are doing their best, but it takes time and it is challenging, and so on. So I think that that's something we need to understand. We have to have sympathy, is that no one can make the change happen extremely fast, because it's really complicated. And quite often people I have high respect towards, they say is that creating a really good school actually is not that difficult. We all can do that one if we have enough resources, and so if you have a lot of resources, we are hiring the best teacher, we are giving them huge amount of
Valitan, en löytänyt etsin.
We are giving them huge amount of resources, technical facilities, and so on and so on. So that's not the main challenge. The main challenge is that how do you create an education ecosystem where every school is a good one? And that's the complicated one. And what I like, for example, the education of Helsinki so much is that people are saying is that our goal is not to have the best schools in the world. Our goal is to have the best worst schools in the world. So they're kind of like concentrating is that if you take the most difficult part of Helsinki, also those schools should be really good. And I think that that's kind of like something which I deeply love.
Sí, ahí está. Compartimos ese desafío, ¿no? Porque además la pandemia, pero la crisis educativa viene afectando más a los más vulnerables, y es ahí donde tenemos que dar una respuesta inmediata. Una pregunta, ya lo dije, trabajaste en un montón de industrias muy distintas, desde la producción de televisión, restaurantes, el aceite de oliva, sos un escritor. ¿Qué harías si fueras ministro de Educación? Digamos, tu primer día como ministro, ¿cuáles son las primeras decisiones que tendrías que tomar?
Right. Okay, let's start with the education on TV. I would say is that education is complex. TV is so much more about creating drama, being black and white, causing crises, and fighting reality TV and so on. And TV the education is beautiful but hard, humble work and so on. So I think that it's complicated to show the beauty of education in 30-minute episode. So that's sort of like really complex, and the change might take 2 years. So if you are painting a wall, you can paint the wall in 20 minutes. But if you want to make the change happen in a child, that might take 2 or 3 or 4 years. And that's beautiful, but it doesn't translate easily to TV. And I think that that's not a bad thing. I think that not everything needs to be in TV. So I'm quite happy that you are not sort of like spoiling education by taking it to TV too much. But what was actually the second question?
Si fueras vos,
fine. Understand. Like I've said many times, is that I don't believe in easy answer, so it's going to be complicated. But I would lobby a lot, and I would concentrate on teachers. I would double the salaries, and I would give them time to re-educate while they are in occupation. I would kind of like re-educate them well. I would give them time to improve themselves. I would give them higher salaries, and I would start to create a kind of like culture of trust. For me, that I do believe in digitalization. I believe in personalized learning. I believe in AI. I believe in all of that. But what I would do as a first thing is that I would try to give them more money because they deserve more money.
Bien. Me gusta que decís que no hay respuestas fáciles, pero te las ingenias para contestarnos todo y muy bien, y abriendo, la verdad, nuevas puertas al debate y agregándole valor al debate. Una pregunta que nos hacen en el chat, y no quería dejar de hacerte, el rol de las familias en el paradigma educativo. ¿Qué lugar tienen hoy las familias? ¿Cómo lo hacemos crecer o cómo acompañamos ese rol?
It is a really, really good question and a massive problem. I think that quite often when there are challenges in any society, we quite easily blame school. We blame teachers that they are not taking care of their job and so on. And I would say is that quite often actually schools are not the ones to blame, but it's parents. So like I said, is that kids are learning huge amount from parents. And if the parents are not excited about the change, if they don't have resilience and so on, it's going to be really harmful for kids. So I think that kids should be, parents should be excited about the change. They should be excited about the change. And I think that they have a really big role. But also I would say is that parents, if schools are trying to improve education, if they are trying new things, I think that parents should also have patience towards the improvements, and they should be, instead of complaining each and every day for something that parents did, I think that they should be thanking teachers a bit more, being a bit more grateful that they are doing work for their kids and so on and so on. So I think that the whole education system, there's not enough gratitude towards teachers at the moment, and that should partly come from parents. But then another question in here is that, okay, but what if the parents don't have the skills? What if they are not even at home? What if they are drinking alcohol? What if they are violent and so on? And that's sort of like the essence of education. So I think that a healthy education ecosystem should be a balancing act, so that it should be kind of like diminishing the gap between the fortunate and unfortunate ones. And unfortunately, that's not what is happening in many countries. I'd say that even the contrary, meaning is that the gap between the private schools and public schools and so on, between big cities and small cities, is even widening. And if we cannot stop this kind of development, I think that globally in the world, in a global world, we will end up in serious problems, serious challenges. And I think that that's why one of the key values of 100 is helping to provide quality education for all, not only promote excellence, but also equity and so on. So I think that these are really fundamental questions.
Bueno, también tomamos nota porque nos queda mucho para trabajar en esa dirección. Otra pregunta que nos hacen en el chat y que me da intriga, me parece muy interesante. 5 características, capaz preferís 3, tampoco queda mucho tiempo. 3 o 5 características que definan una buena escuela. ¿Qué hace a una buena escuela?
I would say is that the thinking is always child-centric. So whenever you are making any changes in school, it always should start with the fundamental question, does this help every child flourish in life? So that would be for me the key thing in here. Not to think, does this help them to test them more or whatever? It should kind of like, the question is, does it help every child flourish in life? The second one would be a culture of growth, meaning growth mindset. And growth mindset should mean both kids and teachers, so that they both agree is that no matter what happens, we are growing together, we are helping each other, and so on and so on. And at the essence of growth mindset is a genuine dialogue between teachers. So both are listening to each other and both have respect to each others and so on. Then it should be a culture of not only, there's a lot of discussion about lifelong learning, but I'm quite excited about lifelong doing as well. So I would say is that in a school that is functioning really well, there's a healthy balance between learning and doing. So it's not only about sort of like studying, but it's also doing something meaningful. Then maybe the fourth one would be is that it's somehow related to the outside world. So it's not happening in vacuum, but it's sort of like in dialogue also with the life outside of the school and so on. So it's sort of like a part of the community rather than an isolated unit. And maybe the last one would be is that whenever I see a flourishing school, quite often there's a good leader and so on. So I think that there's a principle that really likes teachers, believes them, helps them grow and so on. So these are sort of like, for me, the fundamentals more than a beautiful new classroom or extremely creative learning environment and so on. I would say is that it's more like growth mindset, excitement, dialogue, and trust rather than learning environments, for example.
Vamos a poner esto por escrito, Saku, porque es una síntesis genial. Y empezaste con esto de la centralidad en los alumnos, pero después volvemos a conectar con las respuestas anteriores, donde hablaba de la importancia de los docentes, y eso para nosotros es la educación, una educación que se enfoca en los alumnos, pero que tiene como protagonistas a los docentes, que son los verdaderos actores, y que esto que volviste a repetir de la confianza, ¿no? De confiar en los actores. Así que esclarece la importancia de los líderes. Nosotros trabajamos en la formación de directores de escuela y nos parece fundamental porque son gran parte de los motores de la escuela que pueden darle vida y darle una cultura distinta a la escuela. Yeah. Se nos acaba el tiempo y no quiero dejar de recorrer, de aprovechar tu variada experiencia, y cuenta tu biografía, que sos ala izquierdo, right wing, de hockey sobre hielo, que es un deporte muy poco común en América Latina, donde te estamos escuchando, si bien se practica muy, muy poco. Contanos un aprendizaje de ese deporte, que es distinto a otros. Nosotros lo vemos en las películas, que se golpean fuerte, que se pelean. ¿Algún aprendizaje que te deje ser un jugador de hockey sobre hielo? Porque al final hablamos de educación y lo que queremos hablar es de aprendizaje, de que estamos siempre aprendiendo. Entonces, ¿qué aprendiste vos con ese deporte?
I'd say that and now unfortunately I haven't been able to play ice hockey because of the COVID, because of the corona, because all the stadiums are closed. But for me, one of the key findings is that you take 20 guys and you put them in a locker room, and they come from really different backgrounds. One can be working as a taxi driver, another one is working in construction, one is a big rap star, one is working in university and so on. But once you come to the common locker room, I think that you have to respect each and everyone, and you have to treat everyone well. So I think that what has been the main teachings for myself is that in each and every one of us, there's so much more that you can see immediately. And then we should sort of like try to get away from prejudice towards people, and we should be curious about other people, and we should be treating everyone in a beautiful way and so on. And I think that that's true for the school, that's true for the family, and that's true for the ice hockey as well.
Muy bueno. Saku, muchas gracias, muy interesante cada una de las respuestas que nos dejás. Dijiste que no eran fáciles, pero parecían fáciles para vos, porque fue con soltura, con creatividad, que nos fuiste compartiendo varias luces, que vamos a, como te decía, poner por escrito y compartir y difundir, porque estas distintas miradas al mundo educativo nos hacen muy bien.
Great.
Nosotros quedamos a disposición tuya, esperamos que pronto puedas visitar América Latina y podamos tenerte visitando escuelas con nosotros, trabajando con docentes y seguir empujando esto de innovación educativa, de alto impacto y a escala, ¿no? Que compartimos ese desafío por el cual ustedes crearon 100 y América Latina necesita de esto, de soluciones innovadoras, de impacto y de, como vos decías antes, que confiamos mucho en los docentes. Así que te agradecemos y quedamos a tu disposición para seguir pensando en la educación del futuro. A todos los que nos acompañaron hoy, hicieron preguntas, muchas gracias por estar acá. Este espacio sigue abierto para que sigamos pensando en el 2021 la educación del futuro. Muchas gracias.